But I find it very odd that I open my eyes and everything's in grid lines. I could see through the grids into the wall behind me, or the ceiling above me, but it was a completely red grid line. And it was like every single color had a life of its own. Like it was a breathing being, had its own soul. It was very majestic. Even the color of the house was a white that I couldn't even explain here. And that's just a white, and it glowed with its own life form.
Today, I'm here with Molly McGee. Thank you so much for joining me, Molly.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course. So let's start at the beginning then.
Absolutely. I was suffering from an addiction to alcohol, and I had actually 3 years of sobriety when, to kind of put it into context, I got complacent, I got overly confident, and I stopped doing the work that needed to be done to really keep my sobriety. And I did relapse. And when lightning didn't strike in those first few moments of me having that drink, I thought I was pretty much home free. And so, of course, as we all know, when it comes to addiction, that's never the case. And slowly but surely, it started down that same train. And my body kept getting weaker and weaker, but I was ignoring all the symptoms. By then, I had actually resigned from my job of almost 15 years. And I was at, I would have to say, the lowest of my life. I'd never felt more alone. I'd pushed everybody away. It was really a dark night of the soul. And I remember the night that everything happened, it was the darkest night, that feeling of absolute hopelessness and loneliness. And I just felt really tired. And I set my drink down, went to bed, and I came to consciousness just for a few brief moments with like 5 to 6 cops standing over me. My parents had sent a welfare check onto me, and they found me unconscious. And that's the last thing I remember. I was immediately taken to the hospital. And during that time, I don't know what time frame this happened, when the near-death part of this happened. I was in ICU for over a week. But at that time, I only had between, depending on which doctor you spoke to, a 10 to 17% chance of survival. And so on my side of it, I'm starting to learn some of these pieces as I go, because I did not have a spirituality background. I did go to church. I was brought up going to church, but anything spirituality, I knew nothing about. And so I'm starting to understand by listening to some of your other speakers and other near-death experiences that I must have come from the void, because it was complete darkness, but I don't remember, I wasn't allowed to remember that part of it. But my consciousness started, if you will, it would be in the sky, if I could give it any comparison. And below me was my childhood home. Now, my mom was already deceased and had been deceased for about 7 years when this happened. And she was the one that loved this home. I had somewhat of an affection for it, but not enough to take me to that type of experience on my own. But standing in the middle of the road was what I could only say is an avatar of my body. It had no life to it. It was standing straight up like a yoga mountain pose. Like it was just waiting for the soul to come in. And so my consciousness floated down, and while I was floating, if you will, I could see everywhere at once. I had that ability to see in front of me, behind me, everywhere at the same time. But I didn't question it. It was so natural that I never questioned how this was possible or where I was. It was a very natural feeling. And so my consciousness floated into the body, at which time I could simultaneously see out of the eyes of the avatar while seeing above it as well. So I was looking from 2 different perspectives. And there was something standing on my left-hand side. Now, I noticed it when I was floating down, and I didn't question it. It was like it had always been there. And it was really short and statue, almost like the size of a dog, and which would be really fitting for me because I'm a huge dog person. I don't have any children, and I'd had several, die over my life that I was really, really close to. But it didn't have a direct form. You could, it was very translucent. You could see through it, and it was just standing there beside me. And once I got into the body, I started taking in the house. And there was nothing special about this house. It was a very tiny house. But here it was in immaculate condition, absolute perfection. And even though I was about a half a football field away, I could see the whole yard was covered in flowers. And I could see not only the colors, of course, but every detail of those flowers from that far away. And it was like every single color had a life of its own. Like it was a breathing, being of its own, had its own soul. It was very majestic. Even the color of the house was a white that I couldn't even explain here. And that's just a white, and it glowed with its own life form. And so again, I just sat there and I took it all in. I wasn't scared. I was very calm. And that's one thing that stuck out in my mind is prior to this, I had become agoraphobic. I couldn't even leave my house without having a complete, absolute panic attack. And so for me to be free from that feeling was the one thing that I did notice there is that that was gone. And that was absolute heaven for me. And so I continued going back. No, I continued standing there. And again, one thing I didn't say is that there was a spotlight on this avatar or on my body. And while I was there, I felt like it was a street light. But now looking back at it, there's so many details that I didn't understand. It was way too big to be just a street light, but it was definitely illuminating my body and everything around me. And so for a few moments, I just took it all in and very curious, almost like a child, just looking around, looking at the flowers. And there was nobody there with me. I didn't experience another person or any angelic type situations, but I knew there was something with me that I couldn't see besides on the left-hand side of me. And I felt the question. I felt more of a question is, are you going to go in? Are you going to walk in? And meaning into the house. There was a few things that didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I belonged there. I didn't feel like it was the right thing to be there because it was a nighttime. So it was kind of dark where it was. Even though I could see everything in color, it was still night. There was no car in the driveway. There was no lights in the window that would welcome you home. So I really felt like a little bit of a disappointment that maybe I wasn't supposed to be there. And so when I had that feeling come through me, my instant thought was no. And that's the only time that anything was ever spoken. And I opened the mouth of the avatar and I said no. And the way it sounded just like if you were trying to speak underwater. So really slow, really low, and that was it. My consciousness turned around towards the back of the street, and it was over. I came back. And so I came back, though, to a very difficult situation. As you said, I had stage 4 liver and kidney failure, and I had no idea when something like that happened that not only are you on dialysis, but I could no longer walk. I could no longer feed myself. I was so thin that I could actually put my fingers around my arms and touch my fingers together very, very easily. So underweight was definitely a problem. And so once my consciousness came back into my body in the hospital, it was quite a long road ahead of me. At that time, my future was to be put in a home. That was what they wanted to do with me for the rest of my life. So if I thought I had it bad before, my life really wasn't looking good now. And so my parents decided against this and they took me home. So I spent about 7.5 weeks in the hospital before I was finally released. And again, I had to go live with my parents, which was, for any adult, sometimes in your life, that's not something that you want to do. You lose your freedom, you lose your independence. And it was really, really hard for me. I lost my home. I lost, everything that meant the world to me at that time. And so I started the long journey with them, and I was still on dialysis at this time when I left the hospital. I had appointments to come back, 3 times a week, starting right away, several days after I left the hospital. And a couple days then before my next treatment of dialysis, I was sleeping. I was doing a lot of sleeping, wake up for a little bit, try to eat, sleep, letting my body try to start healing, and still couldn't walk. And I woke up even though it was a sleep paralysis. So I was awake. My consciousness was awake, but I couldn't open my eyes and I couldn't move. And it felt like a cattle rod was going up my spine. It was absolutely terrifying and very, very painful. I obviously had no idea what Kundalini was or anything about it. All I knew was this pain was twirling up my spine, and I was screaming to myself in my mind to wake up, like we do sometimes when we're having nightmares, like, "Wake up, Molly, wake up." And I thought it was going to kill me if it went past my neck up into my brain, that my brain wouldn't be able to handle that and I would die. And so it actually did stop at the base of my skull, and I was able to wake up and really sit up at that moment. And I was out of control, crying, screaming, and my father had come in, and I was trying to explain to him what just happened to me. And I didn't have the right words to say that this energy was going up my spinal cord. It didn't make sense. And honestly, a lot of people didn't believe me because when you have kidney and liver failure, you also have hallucinations. And so during the hospital, I had been hallucinating, and I remember the hallucinations. I remember the ones that weren't true versus, my near death experience and also this experience after the hospital. Quite different experiences. So after a couple hours, I was able to fall back asleep again. And during that time, I actually wet the bed. And the reason I share that is it's a very important part because when I woke up, I was humiliated because I was an adult and I just wet the bed. But what I didn't understand at that moment was that was my kidneys healing. And wasn't until later that I figured it out that that moment was a key factor in my healing. And after that moment, my kidney, like I said, my kidneys started working and I never had to be on dialysis again. The doctors were so excited. They figured, they thought I was a miracle patient. But I never told anybody again about the Kundalini because I didn't know what it was. And I didn't know that's what had healed me. So the process of healing, even more of the healing started happening. And, honestly, I had so many different, what I started calling brain glitches, but really they were spiritual experiences that took me years to figure out. It wasn't until 5 years later that I found out what a Kundalini healing was or Kundalini awakening. I've always said it was a Kundalini healing instead of awakening because I didn't feel like that sudden enlightenment. I had about a couple days of feeling like the colors were brighter, the blues of the sky were bluer, but it didn't last long. And it wasn't something that really, like I've heard other people explain, like this really enlightened feeling. So 5 years later, I figured out that I had that. And in the meantime, there was experiences in there where I would basically get a glimpse of the other side or behind the veil. I remember waking up one morning, opened my eyes, and all I saw was grid lines everywhere, kind of like the Matrix. And of course, I didn't understand what that was. I didn't know. And I would freak out, but then I would forget about it. And then the next thing would happen. And so there was all these different brain glitches, as I called them, that kept occurring. And pretty soon they settled down. But meanwhile, my body healed at a extremely quick rate. And I was actually able to go back to work again in a 4 months after, that close to being to death and not being able to walk, which is really incredible. But another piece of this that I want to add, and this kind of gets me to where I'm at now, is during this time, like I said, I had no spirituality background. And I wouldn't have even known the right questions to ask or even who to ask about the things that were happening to me. And it seemed as if I know it was divinely guided that different tools kept getting almost dropped into my lap. And the first one was The Power of Intention by Dr. Wayne Dyer. That book just like came out of nowhere, and I started reading it and I connected immediately with that, started working with intentions. And that's when it seemed like my whole life started coming together. It was like the world moved for me. And I couldn't have planned how everything started to work out better if I had actually tried myself. And so one by one, these tools, whether it was, affirmations, intentions, working with the subconscious mind, all these things that I had no idea about came to my awareness, and I was able to start working with those. And that was what really turned everything around, was not only studying it, but then obviously applying it to my own life. And now at this point, that's what I do for other people. I ended up, once I was much better, I started a program that it's a morning routine, because everything for me started in the morning. I had to catch my thoughts before they had a chance to take off from me, because I was in a fight or flight mode for a very long time, because that's what kept me alive. Sometimes I even had to army crawl just to get to the bathroom, because my body, I was trying to lift weights and very, very light weights, and my body didn't like it yet. And so it would just give out. So I could make it to the restroom or to different places in the home. So yeah, now, so I went from being agoraphobic to now teaching people every single day the things that was given to me, to hopefully give them some experience, strength, and hope as well.
Molly, thank you so much for sharing your story. Your experience is just so beautiful to me. I love the fact that you saw a presence that you think might have been a dog because you're a dog lover. That's something that I think is so meaningful to a lot of people, because our pets can be our family and it can be so painful to lose them. Do you have any thoughts on who that presence was?
Oh, yes, it would have been my dog Chief. Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a dog in college, and he had died from old age. I
Mhm.
had to, unfortunately put him to sleep, and it was the hardest decision of my life. And so I don't have children, so that is like my child. It was like my child, and so, um, and that's another reason I think I didn't question why there was something next to me, is because he was always there, and it was a natural feeling for me to have him there.
I love that. Do you have any thoughts on who the other presence was that was asking you if you're going to go in the house?
Honestly, from the feel of it, to me, it felt like my mother. I didn't see her, I didn't hear her, but it was almost like I said, where I went was almost like her version of heaven. She loved that home. She loved planting flowers. So that would have been her version. And there was also her favorite part of the house was a little light, just a little lamp that she put in her kitchen window that would shine at night. And it was her absolute favorite thing. And that's one thing that I didn't say that stuck out to me, was the light in the window. And so that would have been really important for her. And I can't believe that, since she's already crossed over to the other side, that she wouldn't be there to, welcome me or make me feel less scared or more
Mhm.
at home.
That's so beautiful. What do you think would have happened if you had entered the house?
I don't think I would have come back. Now that's just a theory, of course, but I have a lot of thoughts on this, because I was so low as far as depression goes, and I didn't care if I lived or died. I would have rather
Mhm.
died at that moment. And had I seen more people, the people that I loved, all of those things and more, more parts of the other side than I did, I don't know how I would have handled that coming back. I don't think I would have wanted to come back or and finish what my journey was here. I just don't think I would have been able to handle that at this time. And so I think, everyone has such a different story. And I think they give us what we can handle, how much we can, and still come back and have the ability to finish out our life, knowing how wonderful it is on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense with the fact that you mentioned you may not be able to remember the entire experience because you think that you may have come from the void before that. And it's almost like these experiences are designed to be exactly what we need to progress in our earthly lives.
Absolutely. It gave me just enough to let me know that there was hope out there and that
Mm.
there was something on the other side, and not to be so afraid. My whole life at that point was operated by fear, being agoraphobic, fear of my own shadow, fear of everything. And so getting that glimpse, that taste of it, I didn't take it all away at once, but it took a huge chunk of it away from me to actually begin my new journey once I got back with that recovery road ahead of me.
So you mentioned that you had some hallucinations in the hospital and that they were different from the near death experience and the Kundalini healing. Could you describe the difference between the types of experiences?
Oh, well, they were mostly silly. I would see someone in the corner painting, I would see different things, but that didn't some animals, not dogs, but animals in the room, but it was more, you know, it was silly more than anything. But there was something interesting that happened is I kept seeing my father's eyeglasses on the end of my bed. The bedding in the hospital is white. His glasses were sitting there upside down. Every single time I came back from dialysis, those glasses would be sitting there. And the first few times that I saw it, I asked him why his glasses were there. And once I realized that nobody else could see them but me, I stopped asking because I figured it was part of this from dialysis. Well, what's interesting is fast forward, 3 months down the road, my father started trying to help walk with me in the mornings, going outside and walking, and every day he set his glasses down just like I saw them in the hospital, right on the dining room table, and I'd walk by them and see that exact same thing. So it was, can I say that I was seeing something, beforehand? I don't know, but it was way too much of a coincidence for me to just shrug it off. But again, I kept a lot of it to myself because, they're not a lot into spirituality. So it was a lonely journey. It really was trying to figure it all out on my own.
Yeah, I can imagine. And that was going to be my next question because you said that you didn't have a background in spirituality and then these profound spiritual experiences start happening to you. How did you process all of that?
Honestly, I think there's been so many kind of abnormal experiences throughout my life. And I can't give you an exact one right now, but there's been enough that I'm very open-minded. And so it's kind of like, okay, that just happened. All right, next, I move on with my day. And so it's easily for me to forget or to kind of push it aside and go, okay, well, that just happened. What's the next thing I got to do? And it was kind of a good bad thing where I was able to let it go, but I didn't spend any time reflecting on what does that mean and what did that do, not until much later. And so, like I said, I'm still learning things that happened during that time that makes sense. Like, oh, that's what that was. That's what happened there. And so it's helping me put kind of more of the puzzle pieces together that I never would have known.
Oh, interesting. So you mentioned that after your Kundalini healing, you had some other, I think you called them brain glitches. And one of them, you saw something that looked like grid lines. What do you think that was?
Well, I can only theorize on that, but to me, if everything is like the Matrix type situation, that would make sense from other things I've heard that everything is just this big grid. But it depends on who you talk to and what you see. But I find it very odd that I opened my eyes and everything's in grid lines. I could see through the grids into the wall behind me, or the ceiling above me, but it was a completely red grid line. And I just don't know why my brain would suddenly go to a grid line for no reason, as it was healing itself or whatever it was going through at that time.
Right. Yeah, there's been a lot of talk recently about the possibility of us living in a simulation of some kind.
Hmm. Yeah. And that's just the thing is right now is with everyone with this whole consciousness shifting, the experiences even now continue. My journey is far from being over as far as it seems like it's being handed to me a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. And, I had some experiences already this summer where the fluctuation or the intensity of the frequency was so high, I couldn't drive. I couldn't see straight. I know I'm not alone. There's a lot of people going through this right now. And that's another reason that I really wanted to come talk with you is to hopefully it'll give someone else going through this some information. No.
Right. And are you able to share what any of the other brain glitches were that you experienced?
Okay, this one is really odd. I would suddenly see numbers and letters in the air. I don't know what that was. They would just last for a moment and they'd be floating in the air. Now, was that a hallucination? This was well after the hospital. So, what was that? Was that a hallucination? Possibly, but none of there were so many stacked together of different varieties that I finally in my head again, I was like, "Oh, well, that just happened. Okay. That's weird." But then I went on with my day. That sounds really weird when you say it out loud.
Well, you're in good company because a lot of my guests have had experiences that would be classified as weird and
Mhm.
have gone through a whole process of having, like, questioning their sanity and questioning themselves, and then finding the online community of other people who have similar experiences.
Oh, yes. It's been so nice to learn from other people and to communicate with other people and find your
Mhm.
tribe and yeah, not feel that aloneness. When I thought I was going through this alone, it was very disheartening. And so
Mhm.
it's been such a great time for all this expansion.
Yeah, so how did you end up finding your tribe?
Well, when you can't find it, build it. So
Very true.
so like I said, I started my group, Awaken, aptly named. And now I also do a lot of work with people in recovery. I go to treatment centers as well and I teach my program. But it's teaching that movement, that yoga, that meditation, and also the mind fitness, the working on the thoughts, the subconscious programming, the belief systems, how are we talking to ourselves? All those things that we should have been taught in school that we weren't about really how this reality works and how we can make it our best life instead of feeling like victims.
Right, and on that note, you mentioned that when you came back and were going through the healing process, tools were dropped into your lap to help you rebuild. Could you share maybe what a few of those were, those tools that helped you?
Oh, absolutely. It was, like I said, with Dr. Wayne Dyer was the power of intentions. That one was the biggest one well, because it was my first, but also how to use affirmations, how to start reprogramming my subconscious mind at night and in the morning. And it seemed like every time I would get another breadcrumb, it would lead me to another one and another one. Where it seems so, because I've studied it so long now from that point, it seems like, it should have been obvious, but at that time, I was so ignorant to any of that information that I never thought about what I thought about. I knew I was not happy, that I was very, very depressed and very alone, but why? What was my belief system? What made me feel that way? And so learning that was an absolute catalyst for the major changes in my life because I had to learn to speak, like I said, to speak in front of people. I couldn't even walk out my door and now I speak to people and I know that I didn't do that on my own. I ask for guidance constantly from my A team, I call them my angels and my guides, And I always get answers. It might not be always the ones I want to hear, but they're always there. And that's been the really the best, one of the best things about it is realizing that no matter what, I'm never alone. And that's so nice. That just keeps me in a good spot all the time.
That's wonderful to hear, and that's one of the biggest questions that I get is from people is how to hear from their guides or how to tune into their intuition or whatever language they may use. That's also been a question that I've dealt with throughout my life as well because I've had moments where I will have a flash of this expanded awareness come in and I can sense them there, like intervening in my life in some way, and then it's gone. And for a lot of my life, I just didn't know how to connect to that. Starting to get easier now, but I don't know. I'm just curious if you have any advice for people on how to connect to that.
Oh, my advice is to ask. They're always there waiting for us to ask. And I know I'm not the first person to say that, but I'm going to back them all up. It is definitely ask. They're waiting to help. They love it. And I've asked for signs before, and I'll go outside my door and there'll be a random feather on the ground. There's no birds in this area that, that feather should be there. And sometimes it's a license plate. Sometimes it's, it just makes me laugh when that was a good one. I'll tell them that was a good one. I didn't see that one coming, just have fun with it. But they're always there. And that's another thing is, you hear about your loved ones being there with you as well. And I didn't realize this again for several years that my mother was a smoker. And one of the smells that reminded me of her was cigarette smoke. So when I got out of the hospital for several years, I could smell that smoke so strong that I thought it was coming out of my pores. I thought it was something in me that was making me smell that way because I wasn't smoking. And then it slowly started disappearing. And now I understand that she was there the whole time helping me because that smell shouldn't have been there. And that was her, absolutely hands down.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. So it's just really keeping an open mind. And it is, once you look around and notice things around, you will see it. You'll see the numbers, you'll see the feathers, or someone say something to you that's just the perfect timing. And it's not, I don't believe in coincidence anymore. It's all working for us.
I wanted to ask you about the shift that you mentioned. And what is your perspective on this shift and what's going on with the evolution in consciousness?
Oh, my perspective is that we all are shifting to a higher frequency. The earth is rising per frequency. Our bodies and our minds are doing that as well. And it's not comfortable all the time. We have some weird ascension symptoms that I never would have guessed. I couldn't figure out why my eyes were going blurry or why my bones started aching. I was so tired sometimes where I could barely keep my eyes open at 10 in the morning, and it made no sense. And so once I started, really researching these symptoms and comparing them to what I was feeling and the people around me were feeling, when you have a reason behind something, you're not so afraid anymore. You know that it's going to pass and that our bodies are just adjusting. Just like when we were little and we were going through growth spurts. We're going through our growth spurt right now, but we're all doing it together. And to me, it's pretty amazing. It's exciting.
So you mentioned that one of the things you did was you learned how to reprogram your subconscious mind. Is there a specific technique that you used to do that?
The first way I learned to do it was because our brain, I know I do a lot of research from, Greg Braden. I mean, a lot of different, very, very good teachers out there. And I started putting for my snooze button, if you will, when I first started doing this was to wake up, put headphones on, and have an army guy yelling affirmations in my ear. And so I would be waking up with my brain in that state of natural hypnosis. And over and over and over every single morning, I would wake up like that. And it was sometime later when I realized I never woke up in the fight or flight anymore. that feeling was gone. I had already started reprogramming and things were starting to work out in my life. I'd get that next good job. I'd get the next good thing that I was looking towards having, and the timing of it would be impeccable. And so it works. I absolutely know it does. I've seen people's lives change even besides my own. So it's just it takes work, and you have to want to do it and not just go throughout your day and your life on autopilot. You have to be aware and keep, pay attention to what you're thinking and how you're feeling.
Right. Well, Molly, I would love to have you share a little bit more about what you do.
I don't have a website yet. I don't even know if I'll actually have a website because it's pretty self-explanatory what I do for the most part. But yeah, they can contact me at awakenwithmollymcgee@gmail.com. If they have any questions, if they just want to talk, I mean, I'd love for people to reach out if they want to know more information or even join the group. That would be wonderful. I think community is the most important thing we can have now. And it doesn't matter. That community could be anything you make it. It's just finding your people.
Mm, absolutely. Where can people go to join your group?
They can email me as well.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I'll have your email in the description.
perfect.
Is there any final message that you'd like to share before we go?
No, other than I know for this past summer and these last few months have been really intense for a lot of
Mhm.
people. And I think it's just remembering, that we're expanding, we're evolving, and this is all for our good because it can feel really heavy at times. And I know I felt that way over this past summer as our bodies and our consciousness are changing, but that they're not alone. We're all going through this together, and it's going to be beautiful in the end.
Molly, thank you so much for sharing. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Well, thank you too. It was so wonderful to meet you. I appreciate it. I love and appreciate the work that you do. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I'm so glad that you reached out and we had the opportunity to do this.
Absolutely.
Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and comment with your thoughts and opinions, and check the description box for the links to my free community where I share lots of resources, my Pay What You Can community where we do classes and challenges together, my TikTok, Instagram, my Clips channel, and lovecoveredlife.com where I share my paintings. Thank you so much for your support.